he kept going, and he kept going, and he's with me now. Very good to have you on the show, Jeremy. What is first of all, your response to the report today?
Thank you for inviting me on the show, and thank you for giving the emphasis on Grenfell today in the show. It's very, very important. My response is that at last there's been some information come out. At last there's been the condemnations required of those companies that lied and made a great deal of money out of Grenfell. At last there's a recognition officially that not one of those lives needed to have been lost. All could have been saved, all could have been prevented, and a recognition that the voice of the community demanding safety where they lived was not listened to, was not heard, and was not acted upon. I hope this is a step change in our attitude towards public rented housing like Grenfell, but also a step change in our whole attitude towards the way people live and building control regulations which are beset by fraud, by incompetence and by delays, which means that people live in dangerous accommodation.
I can hear very vividly the anger in your voice. Your erstwhile comrade, or perhaps continued comrade, John MacDonald, famously described to me what happened at Grenfell as social murder. Yeah. Would you agree with that phrase?
Yes, he's absolutely right, because those people died for no reason other than the greed and incompetence of public officials, the greed of private companies. And so when the Prime Minister replied to the statement today, I thought the important point he made was there was a whole culture of contracting out. A contractor is employed to do some work. They employ a subcontractor. They employ a subcontractor. They employ a subcontractor. At the end of the day, you've no idea
who's responsible for what.
There's no responsibility anywhere. Local authorities underfunded, insufficient resources for their building control departments. Often, the developers end up marking their own homework and ticking the boxes to say the work they've done is safe. I've got people in my constituency who live in private sector flats, leasehold flats, which they bought at great expense and great hardship to themselves, now can't sell, can't move, and have to pay huge amounts in extra insurance to pay for a fire watcher to be in the building to make sure it doesn't get burnt down. The developer doesn't want to pay, the freeholder doesn't want to pay, nobody wants to pay, so the only people suffering are those that live there. That's not right.
Yeah. You've made the point in the past, this is not a natural catastrophe of any kind. This is a political story as well. Keir Starmer said also in the Commons today that he was very struck by how people of colour and working class people were not treated in the same way as middle class people, I might say, the rest of us, as it were. Your reflection on that?
I've often made the point that Grenfell, abominable, appalling, terrible loss of life and everything else, had this been a private development, totally private development on the Bayswater Road, with flats being rented out at £1,500, £2,000 a week, I'm sure they'd have all been put in the Savoy or the Hilton within a few hours of the fire. It would all been sorted out, and there would have probably been proper fire regulations in place in the first place. It's contempt for the poorest, most vulnerable people who make London run.
And you heard one of those people talking about, I think it was his uncle, coming in and protesting before the fire happened with placards about the condition of the building and being told, like so many other people, he was a troublemaker.
Well said, that point. I was at Grenfell the day after the fire, and in fact it was still smouldering and it was there, and I was talking to the families who were in the centre, in the church, getting the food and so forth, and they were obviously desperate. And I remember a man coming up to me, he said, you know what, Jeremy, you know what, I've been down to town hall so many times telling them this was going to happen. And they said, what do you know about anything? Who are you? You're just a tenant.
And I assume there from what you've been saying, you'd like to see criminal convictions follow this.
I asked that question to the Prime Minister today. I think there has to be a lot of lessons learned from this, and one of them is there's no hiding place for these crooks that caused these deaths.
It's a very new kind of House of Commons today. I must just ask you, since you're here, about the group that you're part of. There's yourself and 4 of the independent so-called Gaza MPs as a group.
Oh, don't call us Gaza MPs. We're MPs who've all fought on Gaza, but on lots of other issues as well.
That's exactly what I was going to ask you about. Is there a social or indeed socialist agenda across other issues that you share?
Absolutely. We have a very strong position on arms sales to Israel and Gaza, obviously, and thank you for recognising that. But we're also very clear about ending the two-child benefit cap and not taking the winter fuel allowance from most older people. And so we're making a number of social statements as well. And
you're sort of on your way to a manifesto.
Well, it's early days. We've only been here a few weeks, but we're getting on very well together. We're working very closely together, and we're supporting each other. And so it's a great step forward.
I don't think it's a state secret to say that there are some current Labour backbenchers who've lost the whip, who are not very happy with the direction of the party. Is there an open door for those who'd like to walk through it?
Listen, those are my friends. I've known all of them for years and years and years, and of course we talk all the time. Listen, if you're a member of Parliament, you've got a responsibility to speak out, and I will always speak out about the two-child benefit, about the fuel allowance, and about the horrors of Grenfell.
Jeremy Corbyn, thank you very much indeed for coming on the show tonight.
You're most welcome.